This is the first video in a new video series, in this case concerning a set of rules called Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur or New Divisional Commander. This video is designed to provide a high-level overview of Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 2, why it exists and how it's different from other sets of rules and how it's the same. I'll not go into the detailed mechanics of the rules in this video, but instead will only provide information required to determine if these rules will scratch an important itch that you may be experiencing, or alternatively is simply not the type of rules that you want to use. Other rules which are similar or could achieve the same scratching itch resolution will also be listed. Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 2 is based on Core Commander version 6, which in turn is a quick play version of the original Core Commander written by Bruce Taylor back in the late 1980s. The element scale is approximately company or 12 to 18 vehicles, guns, aircraft or helicopters per element, or 120 to 180 men per element. On average, it's 15 vehicles, guns per element and 150 men per element. Each player is supposed to command a division. In some cases it's not a full division, but nonetheless the objective is to command a division. The ground scale is 1 to 15,000 or 1 centimetre equals 150 metres. Game scale is 90 minutes per game turn, or, looking at another way, the number of daylight game turns in a day is 8. Version 2 differs from version 1 in not utilising strength points. This is why the element scale has a range. In version 1 each strength point represents a very specific number of vehicle or men. But in version 2 we need some flexibility to allow for the creation of reasonable force mixes. While I love the original Bruce Taylor's Core Commander, I have to admit I dislike strength points. This shows the full development path of all the related rules, starting with Core Commander OMG and The Road to Berlin, moving into Core Commander version 5, and then into the Quick Play Core Commander version 6. From that point on, a number of different rules were created. Each used a different scale. The names of the rules represent the formation size a player would command. All these rules follow the strength point principle of the original Core Commander, although the battalion scale version does not, because basically each strength point represents a full element. So that is a bit of the exception. Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 2 is the latest set of rules where the concept of strength points have been removed entirely. And I have to admit, it's so much easier and faster to play, and I'm not experiencing any major downside with this. What is the objective? Well, this picture does not show a micro-armour game. This is my current objective. Being able to play a game while fully seated, which currently is a playing area of 2 to 3 feet, optimally for micro-armour. In this case, the playing area is 2 by 2 feet because it's a game of DBA. For micro-armour, I feel you probably need a slightly wider playing area, although I would dearly love to be able to play a micro-armour game on a 2 by 2 because that really hits the sweet spot. This image shows a typical playing area, which I would use with Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur, which is 80 centimetres or 90 centimetres by 120 centimetres. This basically represents 3 feet by 2. Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 2 achieves this, as does Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 1, and for that matter Neu-Core Commander version 1, and even LWRS or Bewegunskrieg, the reformatted version of LWRS. Just a note, in a previous note I suggested painting the playing area base, that is the actual tiles, a light colour to make the playing area as light as possible. This is my attempt at this, and I'm afraid my advice was wrong. It is best to paint your playing area colour which matches the flock as closely as possible. In this example you can see light green dots and splotches, which is rather annoying, and I've got to work out some way to get rid of them. This image shows a playtest of these rules, which is on a 2 by 3 foot playing area. It differs slightly from the previous image, but is approximately the same. I'm also looking at a slightly larger area, 80 centimetres by 120 centimetres, because I actually have insulation sheets this size and they're very light, and although they're large, they do fit in the back of my rather old Audi A4. This allows a player to remain seated for the entire game. They can reach over to any spot on the playing area and even some space on each flank. In my test game I have a table on the right which provides additional player space for additional things. This is a top-down view of my optimal playing arrangement, which I typically use in the club, which I play at, or even in the garage. I have 2 tables approximately this size. This gives me more than adequate space to place charts and tables, reinforcements, losses and other game aids. And I have to admit, even these rules, which are designed to minimise the amount of this ancillary stuff, you get lots and lots of charts and tables and books that you need to constantly reference to. While I have to admit the perfect playing area is probably 2 by 2 feet, as used in DBA, I will certainly think along these lines, and in terms of future rules development. But for now, this is the smallest playing area and table arrangement which meets my requirements, while still giving me an interesting game. In most cases, a full game will be 8 game turns in length, that is daylight game turns, although it's possible for this to be 10 game turns if attacking at dawn, which allows the enemy to continue to fight until the end of dusk. Game length may also be extended if summer in the northern hemisphere of Europe. Although, strangely enough, I do not like these as it makes scenario play balance a little bit difficult, and my test run game uses this, which is the second video in this series, and I did notice some issues. Not major, but nonetheless some issues. The attacker basically gets too many game turns to attack, and the defender too many game turns to launch a counterattack for this size of playing area. I would probably prefer a 3 by 3 foot playing area in this case, which is possible, but it defeats the purpose of my objectives. So I'm still trying to remain with my 2 by 3 foot playing area. My example play video shows this game in summer 1939, and it worked. It worked quite well. Although I think because of the length, it gave the attackers a little bit too much of an advantage. Special scenarios could allow for night attacks, although the way the rules are designed, the attacker risks exhaustion in this case, and you would probably not do this. Even my test game, which went for 12 daylight game turns, the Germans at the end were exhausted. However, they'd managed to capture so much of the playing area during their first half of the game that it still allowed them to achieve a marginal victory. The sequence of play is rather basic and identical for all the Corps Commander version 6 sets of rules. The key point is movement and fire combat is combined in a single phase, which means we avoid the line up in a good firing position and then let loose the gods of war tactics. It also requires the opponent to be able to conduct opportunity fire in response to the enemy's movement or fire combats. At this scale, we need to consider supply, which is as simple as possible. Supply is critical in the scenario, as only in-supply elements are counted for victory points determination. Even in rules that don't require supply, such as battalion, you still need something along these lines for victory points purposes. Initiative is used to determine movement order, which is critical for the attacker particularly. This does try and force players to engage in historically feasible game, so the biggest advantage of early war German forces is the fact that they are the strategic and operational attacker rather than possessing superior equipment, which they didn't in the early period of the war. While later in the war they may get very sexy equipment but find themselves at a disadvantage when attacking, unless involved in an operational offensive such as Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, but even in this particular case, it's not the same as 1939 because they're only the operational attacker. Why is this important? Well, in order to break through rapidly, you need to have a reasonable amount of control of player order in the first half of the game. If you attempt to attack and you don't have strategic and operational attacker benefits, it's hard to achieve this, which can really stuff up your attack. And probably, what occurred with Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein. The Germans had a good strategy, but any little problem, when they experienced a problem at Bastogne, they all stuffed up, while in 39-40 they could always overcome this whenever they got held up, etc. Aircraft is covered in a simple manner, with aircraft being placed on the playing area in a specific order and then conducting a quality test to determine if they successfully are placed on the playing area. Aircraft engaged in air-to-air combat simply neutralise each other. Surviving aircraft are subject to AA fire, and if they survive, they can conduct from 1 to 2 air-to-ground combats. That's it for air combat. Artillery can conduct one of 4 missions, 3 of which occur in their own special phase, and doesn't normally occur very much, and the final, fire support, during the phasing, fire and movement phase, which is really where the bulk of artillery or indirect fire occurs. During the phasing, fire and movement phase, a typical element can conduct 2 actions. If it has poor quality, it needs to test for the second action, which makes it very hard for low quality troops to attack. Very high quality troops can get 3 actions if they pass a quality test, which means they can launch an attack against an enemy position from a considerable distance away. Actions are used for a wide variety of other activities, such as taking cover, recovering from disorder, mounting transports, limbering guns, and a host of engineering tasks. An element can perform 2 actions in a single game turn, typically, which is either moving or conducting fire combat, or some related activity. Elements typically conduct a single movement action in each game turn on average. This chart shows the movement allowance in centimetres. As we can see, the infantry typical move is 5 centimetres and vehicles on average 10 to 14 centimetres per game turn. As can be seen, movement does not involve crossing vast playing areas, so our 2x4 or 2x3 foot playing area is more than adequate for a single day base game. You may be asking, wait a minute, if infantry move 5 centimetres and the playing area depth is 60 centimetres, that is 12 game turns worth of movement. Is this correct? Infantry fighting its way across the playing area would be restricted in this manner, but if it was not fighting, it could be expected to conduct 2 actions per game turns, which involve movement, and if moved along roads in travel mode, it could cover this in 3 game turns. So it's all about, the movement range is all about movement under attack more than, maximum possible movement rates. The observation rules are fairly familiar to most of the Corps Commander rules, even going back to Bruce Reed Taylor's original set of rules. The only real difference is the scale, the ground scale change. So, for example, infantry in the open in clear terrain and in daylight are visible up to 6 centimetres away. If in cover, this drops to 4 centimetres, and if it was involved in any movement, this rises to 10 centimetres. If it was engaged in any kind of fire combat, this goes up even further. You can see by these observation ranges, the front lines of each side would typically be about 4 centimetres away from each other. If you need to launch an infantry attack against the enemy, the gap would need to drop to 2 centimetres. Otherwise you couldn't do it. This would require infantry slowly moving under fire to their attack points, which would take at least a game turn. If motorised, a gap of 7 centimetres is all you need, so motorised troops can hide behind other troops before they surge forward into combat with the enemy, where they quickly dismount and start fighting. When a player is conducting movement or fire combat during that player's phasing fire and movement phase, the opposing player can respond to that movement and fire combat. When this occurs, it's called opportunity fire and represents a type of zone of control. If an element sees sufficient movement occurring within range of its weapons, it can conduct opportunity fire against that element. If an element is subject to direct fire, it can respond and conduct fire combat against the element firing at it. This keeps the opposing player involved even when that player may not be the phasing player. Fire combat is the most complex aspect of the rules, and all types of fire combat are dealt with in this single table. Indirect fire against hard or soft targets use a different system to determine the correct column. Direct fire uses a simple system, but different rows to determine the correct column based on the target. Once the correct column is determined, this indicates how many dice are thrown, with a 4+ resulting in a hit. Once you total all hits, you save a save die roll. If the result is greater than the number of hits, there is no effect. Otherwise, the element is disordered. If the number of hits exceeds 6, then the element is automatically disordered, and the save die roll is used to determine if the element also becomes disrupted. In this case, subtract 6 hits from the number of total hits and spin the save throw. If the result is equal to or less than the remaining hits, the element is disrupted, which basically means it's removed, attempts to rally, which means it could be gone forever, or at very best it comes back after a number of game turns. Key part of the game is quality, with all elements under a headquarters having a specific quality rating ranging from between 1 and 6. An element will conduct quality tests for a wide range of functions, such as calling in aircraft, artillery, counter-battery fire, and rallying disrupted elements. Elements which are disrupted are removed, and during the rally phase conduct a quality test. If it fails, it's removed permanently. If it passes, it's returned a number of game turns equal to the die roll. So a quality 1 element needs to spin a 1 to pass, and it's returned the following game turn. There is no routing elements in these rules. That is all abstracted away. While creating these rules, my original objective was to find a set of rules which allowed me to achieve the objective that Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur allows me to achieve. The closest set of rules I could find was LWRS, or its reformatted version, Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur. Ideally, the playing area should be 3 feet deep when using LWRS, but as long as your game does not include any major breakthroughs, a 2 foot deep playing area is acceptable. To achieve this, the attacker should not be more than 1.5 times the strength of the defender. So you do get a very different game. It's certainly less mobile, but you can certainly play a game on a 3 by 2 foot playing area using LWRS. You just need to put together the scenario. The other option, which another gamer actually on the internet suggested to me, which I thought was interesting, was to use 3mm figures using the rules Panzerkorps, and to reduce all sizes by 50%. While this is being used by this player that mentioned it to me, the change in base size is problematic, and even if you could do this easily, the small bases have become very fiddly to use. So as a result, you really need to join the bases together. This is viable and something I will look at, but for now I want to use my existing elements, which are all 3 centimeters wide. But when I get some 3mm figures, I will seriously consider something along these lines, because it could achieve my objective without needing to worry about creating new sets of rules. Another option is DDataBerlin, which uses squares to regulate movement in combat. You could reduce the size of each square and use 3mm figures, without worrying too much about the actual bases the 3mm figures are on. Smaller games could be viable with no modifications to the basic rules in this case, and this is another option I may consider in the future. But in summary, you could certainly use Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 1, which uses strength points and achieves the objectives I've just mentioned. But this is still basically a Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur set of rules, so it's not really a different alternative. This ends my overview of Neu-Divisions-Kommandeur version 2. Denken Sie daran, immer für Heil, Heimatland zu kämpfen.